Recording. JSA and SWMS. What is the difference? Before we go there, thanks for listening to this presentation as one of the Lunch and Learn series. We will first understand what a JSA and a SWMS is all about, and quickly look at how a JSA is different before we discuss on the steps to complete a JSA as referenced by LogiCamps. Most of us being involved in projects will have used either or both of these to assist us to improve or strengthen the workplace safety when carrying out an activity. Though both the JSA and SWMS are risk assessment tools used to strengthen workplace safety, there is some difference. The term JSA has been in common use in Australian industry for decades. A JSA is a form of risk assessment which details step by step how the task is to be carried out safely, as opposed to many other risk assessments which only considers static conditions, such as if you take a risk assessment for a machine or a chemical storage type of risk assessment. Whereas in a JSA, it is dynamic in accordance to the changes to the work scenario. For example, say after a rain or a strong wind, or when new tools are introduced into the task, change to the chemicals to be used. In all these instances, a new set of hazards are introduced which need to be considered and managed. The JSA has to be reviewed and controls put in place to manage the new hazards before starting the work. In recent years, some of the companies have expanded this term JSA to JSEA to include environmental aspects, which is all well and good. However, it is not necessary to keep on changing the title, as JSA and can and usually does specify every aspect of the task, including safety, quality, energy efficiency, environmental aspects, and also it looks at the easiest way to perform the task in a logical sequence. Some of the work areas, they also refer to JSA or JSEA as HIP, JHA, JHB, or JSEA. We need not be worried about all these names because they all mean the same. It's only the acronym. This is the format of a JSEA template which we use in LogiCamps. You will need to complete the job description, which is right at the top, the first big box. State if a permit is required, because in non-hazard areas you do not require a permit, and also you have to state the PP required. In the activity section, which is on this lower part here, there are only three main components. The first part is the basic steps, which you write down in sequential order down this side. Then you look at the hazards, and then the last box, main box here, is where you put in the controls or the preventative actions, which will also include equipment, PPE to be worn, and any special conditions. This is the front page of the SWMS document template used also in LogiCamps. The SWMS will require a little bit more detailed information compared to a JSEA, like what plant and equipment you're going to use, details of the maintenance activity required for this activity, competencies, licenses, and if chemicals are to be used, the chemicals name and the MSDS details. So what is a SWMS? The term SWMS gained common usage in Victoria following the introduction of the OHS regulation in 2007. A safe work method statement, or SWMS as its acronym is prescribed for all high-risk construction work. When it first came out, it was targeting only the construction industry, and it was specific for high-risk construction work. That does not mean that its use is limited to construction sector. As we now know, it is common across all industries. The regulation do not prescribe the format or details of a SWMS, other than in Regulation 5.1.5, which requires the SWM to identify the work, that is high-risk construction work, state the hazards and risks to health or safety of that work, sufficiently describe measures to control those risks, and describe the manner in which the risk controls measures are to be implemented. The usage of the terms SWMS has increasingly been applied across or outside of high-risk construction work. And this is where some confusion has arisen as to should we use a JSEA or SWMS. When a task or a job is identified as high risk, we must use a SWMS. Then, what is high-risk work? High-risk work refers to work that requires a person to have a license to perform that work. This includes, but is not limited to, scaffolding works alone, or dogging, or operating forklifts, or even using cranes or EWP, etc. It can also include other situational types, like working less than 10 meters off a rail track, tasks that have a potential to kill or cause grievous harm to the pair. What do I mean by pair? P-E-A-R. It means people, environment, asset, and reputation. So if the task has a potential to kill or cause grievous harm to the pair, or those included in the company's life-saver policy, we work using a SWMS. All other tasks, a JSEA is sufficient. Now that we have looked at what a JSEA is, what a SWM is, we will now discuss on completing a JSEA. Today's learning, like what is shown on the slide, is to ensure uniformity and to standardize across Logicam operations. To ensure all Logicam personnel can complete a JSEA to the requirements of the company's standard operations. We all come to work to have a better life now and when we retire. Nobody comes to work planning to get hurt unless you are a member of some terror group. To achieve this ultimate goal, we need to have a systematic approach of how we complete tasks safely. So we complete a JSEAs, sometimes SWMS, depending on the risk classification, as we have seen earlier on. A SWM is for high risk activity. Why is a JSEA completed? 1. You want to identify the task, the location or the area, or even the equipment the work is to be carried out on. 2. You need to identify the sequential or logical steps for the task or the activity. 3. You also want to identify what are the hazards associated or created. That is the main gain of using a JSEA. You are identifying all the hazards, and last of all, to put in the controls. Hence, a JSEA is a procedure which helps integrate accepted safety and health principles and practices into a particular task or job operation. In a JSA, each basic step of the job is to identify potential hazards. I repeat, in a JSEA, each basic step of the job is to identify potential hazards and to recommend the safest way to do the job. That is creating a planned and controlled work environment. The terms job and task are commonly used interchangeably to mean a specific work assignment, such as operating a grinder, using a pressurized water extinguisher, or changing a flat tire. Let us not get too bogged down with terms as long as we understand what it covers. Once we have reviewed the operation, that means we have looked at the work scope, we are ready to start completing the JSEA, from which is to 1. Describe what work is to be carried out, where or on which equipment. You may find that I'm repeating a few terms because these are the basic things of a JSEA. You always describe what work is to be carried out, where and on which equipment. Identify the work activity to assess safety or environmental risks. Then we have to define what the safety or environmental risks are, followed by describe the measures to put in place to carry out the work in a safe and environmentally sound manner, which is the controls. And where required, to include description of the equipment to be used, the qualification and training of the personnel doing the work. This will be all in your controls, including legislation, standards and codes to be complied with. The main purpose of completing a JSEA is to identify all the known and potential, repeat, known and potential, so that the right barriers or controls are put in place. What we have just done is carried out a basic risk assessment. We have just identified, assessed, put in the controls, and take the action and start monitoring. That's what we have just done, and that is the basic steps of a JSEA. Nothing but a mini, you can call it mini, or even a basic risk assessment. Like I mentioned earlier, the task activity steps breakdown must be single steps in logical sequence and not too fine or too broad. Let's say one of the tasks is to set up the work area. We can just state it in the JSEA as set up work area. This can be broad. We can again, if we want, we can break it down to the same thing, set up task area into traffic management, access and egress, other work groups, before we say yes, now we are going to position the digger. So instead of having one step, we say set up the work area, we have broken it down into 4 steps. And for each of these steps, say for traffic management, we can now put in the control, bund, work area and signages. Access and egress, we can say we will erect scaffold or put in a ladder. For other work groups, we can communicate, identify conflicting activities or hazardous environment created before we position the digger. So if you put it too broad, you will find that it's very hard for you to break down the hazards or even to assess the right hazards, because like I said, the main idea of a JSEA is to identify the hazards. If you don't get the hazards right, then you are not creating a safe workplace. For a JSEA, the thinking process should be what we do and not how we do. Remember, what we do and not how we do. When you consider pair, that is people, environment, asset or reputation, now that we have broken the activity into single steps, we can proceed to identify the hazards. Usually the tendency is to lump all the hazards for task activity into one box. So I will repeat, list the hazards separately so the controls are easy to identify and it also clear for the JSEA user. Remember, somebody else is going to use, or your team members will be there working with you. They too have to read and sign the JSEA document. So they too have to understand what are the controls or what are the hazards. So by breaking it down into individual, it will be easier for them. This slide shows some hazards we should think about when completing a JSEA, like struck by, striking against, caught in, fall into, exposure, overexertion. These are the type of scenarios that you need to think of while you're thinking of each activity. What kind of things that can go wrong, and then that will help you to formulate or identify the hazards or even the potential hazards. We also need to consider any site-specific conditions or hazards that may impact the workplace safety, and conversely, how our activity may impact other groups. Example, our activity, we may have some emissions or a byproduct which can contaminate the groundwater. We may cause some erosion, or even the waste disposal method we apply, or how our activity is going to impact on the flora or fauna. And we should also look at the location where we are working, say like if you are near the schools, hospitals. So noise is a big hazard. Communication is another one, which we need to make sure we do it right. And if you are working very close to ecological reserves, who are authorities you need to contact? What are the type of barriers you need to put in so that whatever byproduct we produce or the waste does not go into the ecological system and spoil the ecological niche. Don't forget to ask what if question. What if there's a product in the line when we break the flange? Or what if he or she drops the hammer? Or what if my hand slips on the spring? So these are the type of questions you need to ask yourself whenever you do a JSEA. This is a sample of the JSEA form which you have already seen earlier. When considering the controls, use the hierarchy of controls. I'm very sure most of you are familiar with this, so I will not go into detail of that, but we know the best way to control a hazard is to eliminate, and the last method is PPE. PPE is not a control, it is just a preventative or protection, limited protection I mean. Okay, the idea behind this exercise that we are doing today is to ensure our activities stay on the right side of the bow tie. This is the right side of the bow tie, where prevention to eliminate or minimize, and not on the left side, which is to reduce or firefight the escalation after an incident has taken place. So we will always want, our JSEA is always to ensure that our workplace is on this side where our barriers, our threats are identified, the controls are put in place, or the barriers are put in place to prevent a top event. We don't want to firefight here when after the event trying to reduce the escalation. This is not a situation we like to be, but in case we come into a situation, our JSEA should also consider that part to put in the recommended actions that require in case there is a top event. The choice of controls will be based on whether the choice is feasible, your assessment of the existing level of risk. If the risk level is extreme or high, then obviously your control is going to involve a lot more stringent, will be a lot more dynamic, and you'll be putting a lot of more effort and things like that. The degree of additional protection, how much additional protection or prevention measures will give us. The cost and benefit of the preventative measures. So this will be the factors determining the choice of your controls. When identifying hazards, we should also look at energy sources like kinetic energy, not only at the job or the task, but at the equipment or tools, or even in the process. What are the type of energies that we're going to be with, or working with, or be in the vicinity of? Okay, so in case that energy is being released, what can happen to us? So some of those type of energies are kinetic energy, mainly falling or things falling, body mechanics, electrical energy, mechanical, chemical, pressure, noise, thermal, and radiant. So once you identify this energy, it's very easy for us to put in the controls based on our experience of working with this kind of energy sources. There are only three main components of a JSEA, like I said before. So JSEA is not something very complicated. It's something simple and easy to do. The best way to do it is do it in a team of a group of people, like those who have had some experience on that, those who know what the job is all about, those who have some idea or have knowledge about the hazards in that workplace. So the three steps you will be doing in any JSA, leave alone SWMS, will be the same. You list the steps. That's the basic steps. The stages of the task, for example, like start the machine, load the machine, clear the blockage, and unload. These will be our basic steps. Then the hazards for each of these individual steps. And lastly, the controls, which is the step-by-step instruction on how to safely carry out the task, including equipment required, the PPE to be worn, and any special precautions based on the site requirement. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you for listening.